Welcome to Cornerstone's Walking in the World Equipping Class. I am Brian, and with me I have Scott.
Hello.
And Matt.
Hi.
And what we are doing in this class is teaching you how to live the basic Christian life. So this class is built around the discipleship pathway that you've seen in your notes by now. And this is our second session exploring the mission category, talking about loving deep relationships with non-Christians. And so, Matt, can you catch us up on what we've covered so far?
Yeah, in this class, we've been talking about how really the whole purpose of the class is the whole purpose of our lives, and I guess the class as well, but the whole purpose of our lives is to spread and display the glory of God. And what we've said is that mission is one of the ways that we spread and display the glory of God. And we talked about in 2 Corinthians 5 how we're called ambassadors and how we're called to engage our city and be ambassadors for Christ. We talked about what that looks like, and really what that boils down to for us is this love paradigm that we used previously in community, but it also applies here in mission. And the love paradigm gives us sort of categories for us to understand how we can spread and display the glory of God in our relationships with non-Christians. So last time we talked about the knowing category and how if we're going to love our non-Christian neighbors, friends, coworkers, that involves understanding them, knowing them, listening to them, talking to, engaging them, knowing them as an act of love. And that is what we've covered so far.
All right, in this session, we'll talk about the next part of that paradigm, serving. And here's what we'll talk about. We'll talk about why serving is an important part of loving others, and then 5 ways the Bible teaches us to serve people. And so first, let's talk for a bit about a quote that a lot of people have heard. It goes along these lines: preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words. Now, can we get some thoughts on this? Is that what we're going to be talking about when we talk about serving other people as a part of mission?
Well, I think in some ways, yes and no. I mean, I think it's an easy quote to raise up as like the thing that of course that's what it's really all about. It's also an easy quote to demonize, right? To say like, oh, that's silly. Like you can't share the gospel without words. But at the same time, I think of course you can't share the gospel without using words. But the gospel is meant to be manifest, meant to be lived out in your life. And so the non-Christians in your life should see it lived out by you. They should feel your love. They should know your love from their experience, not just from the words you say. If you're trying to tell them about God's incredible love, they should see that manifest in your life, and then the love that you have, and even through the love you have for them.
Yeah, I think that quote is oftentimes used as a caricature of 2 different types of Christians, right? The Christian who is loving and serving, and then the Christian who just preaches all the time and doesn't actually care about you at all. They just throw and lob the gospel at you. And the reality is the Bible tells us and gives us a radically different picture than either of those 2 caricatures. The Bible gives us this holistic picture of love that we're called to as Christians, that is a manifestation of what it means to be living on mission for God, to spread and display His glory in the context of our relationships with non-Christians. So it's a helpful quote for bringing out those caricatures, throwing them to the side and saying, here's what the Bible actually says about serving and loving and spreading the gospel. And so when we talk about this, when we think about this idea of serving, and I think, Scott, you did a really good job explaining a little bit as an intro to what it means to serve. The reality is when we think about being ambassadors for Christ, we can focus on this talking kind of thing. But the reality is as well, we're called in Scripture to love non-Christians in our lives with our actions. We see this in Matthew chapter 5, for example, when Jesus is talking about what it means to follow Him. He says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven." And part of what that means to let your light shine before others is serving them, that they see your good works and maybe not even just see them, but experience your good works towards them. And that's really what our calling is in this paradigm, to love non-Christians in our lives. And so we're going to explore different ways that we serve the non-Christians in our lives in the paradigm. And I think you have that in your notes.
Yeah, the paradigm should be in your notes. And so we've already touched on this part of the paradigm in the last section of the class, talking about community. Like, Matt, are we going to see the same elements in this paradigm as we did in the community section?
Yeah, basically we will. We will see the same elements, but we're going to look at them in a bit of a different order than we did in the community section. We're going to look at praying for non-Christians in our lives, giving to non-Christians in our lives, bearing with non-Christians in our lives, forgiving non-Christians in our lives, and pursuing non-Christians in our lives. And I think all of those 5 components of what our service towards non-Christians looks like are really crucial to help us understand on a practical level what it looks like to serve non-Christians in our lives.
Okay, let's take some time with each one of those then. So what do we need to talk about when it comes to praying?
Yeah, I think we mentioned this in the community section as well, but I think it's easy to overlook prayer as an aspect of serving. Prayer is such a powerful and really a beautiful way to serve people in our lives, and especially non-Christians. The Bible tells us that prayer is effective in the lives of other people. It's something that actually makes an impact. That if we believe that God is real, that God hears our prayers, that we're called to intercede on the behalf of other people in our lives, and that's not just Christians. It really should be our first instinct when we think about serving people around us. It can be easy to overlook this, but God calls us to pray for those around us, and really that should be our first go-to when it comes to serving non-Christians in our lives. There's different ways too to do that. We can do that in different ways for non-Christians. Of course, I think the one that people go to automatically is we pray for their salvation, right? Which I think is obviously a really crucial and important part of what our service in prayer looks like for non-Christians in our lives. I think about Romans chapter 10, Paul describing his heart and his desire and his prayer for God, for the Jewish people, that they may be saved, right? Paul prays and pleads with God that his brothers and sisters of the Jewish people would be saved. And we're called to do the same. We're called to pray for not just our own ethnic group, but we're called to pray for any non-Christians in our lives that they would be saved. And that's a powerful act of service. But it's not just that. It's not just salvation. I think one of the major errors we have in this area is we reduce prayer for non-Christians in our lives to just salvation. There's other issues we can pray for. I think about 1 Timothy chapter 2. Paul says, "First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, and that this is good and pleasing in the sight of God, our Savior, who desires all people to be saved." So in this command, he's calling Christians to pray supplications, asking for things, prayers, intercessions, thanksgivings on behalf of all people, whether they're Christians or not. So if your non-Christian neighbor has a need for a job and they ask you for prayer, you don't have to just say, "Oh God, please save this person," and whatever about the job. Like you can actually pray, "God, please give Johnny a job. Please give him a job so that he can work faithfully and take care of his family. And God, maybe use that job to show him how great you are and how generous you are and how gracious you are, so that he sees how marvelous you are and comes to worship you as well." You can pray for both of those things. It doesn't have to be an either or.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a great point. I think it can be such an incredible inroads to talking about spiritual things and to talking about God, and even for them to even recognize God's existence or presence at all. I mean, I talk with my non-Christian friends a lot about, whatever comes up, I affirm to them that I'm going to pray for that I want to be praying for that. And I've seen more than once that when they do get that job, when they do experience healing, when they do experience freedom, like there's a credit that they give to God because they know I've been praying, and it opens the door to saying, okay, wait, maybe he is real. And I think it's I mean, like we talked about with Christians as well. Like it's powerful to think about the amount of time we spend talking to somebody about God and talking to God about them, because I think we can't expect for someone to experience true heart change only by our words. Like they need, obviously they need the work of the Spirit of God. And so it's our responsibility, it's our joy to go to God and to beseech him for his work in their lives. And at the same time, I mean, it also reminds, I think when we pray for somebody, it also reminds us to actually talk to them about God as well.
Absolutely.
Right? So that if I'm praying for him, if I'm praying that they would come to know Christ, if I'm praying that they would know truth, and then I'm talking to them, I realize, oh wait, God's put me here to be a part of the answer to that prayer, to be one of the ways that he brings that about in their lives.
And I think even praying, when we pray for people in our lives, our hearts often soften towards them. They get soft and loving towards those people as we genuinely care about the issues that are going on in their lives. Mm-hmm. And it's powerful, right? It gives non-Christians in our lives the sense that God cares about details, that God's not distant and too busy to care about my job, this little person that doesn't even worship them. It gives them a sense of God's sovereignty. It gives them the sense of what faith looks like, to be humble and needy and asking God for things. It's a powerful way to demonstrate that. And I would argue, just on the practical side, I think it's a powerful way to serve the people in your life that you're praying for. Pray with them if you can. Not just for them, pray with them. There's something really powerful about saying, hey, can I pray for you right now in this moment as you're sharing this concern with me? It gives them a sense of our need for God and what it looks like to have faith in God and walk in life with him. And some people might say no, they might be uncomfortable with that, but there's something really powerful about going to God with them and saying, hey, can I pray for you right now? And lift those prayers up to God immediately in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's prayer. So then what about giving? How does that look in this context?
Yeah, giving is really crucial as an aspect of serving people in our lives. And we talked about this as well in the community section. But when you love someone, you want to use whatever it is that you have, time, energy, resources, to help them. And part of walking on mission is sharing what we have with others. I think about the way Paul labored in 1 Thessalonians. He talks about how in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 to 10, he reminds the Thessalonians of his labor and toil and how he worked night and day, that they might not be a burden to any of the Thessalonians as they proclaimed the gospel to them. So they weren't even Christians yet, and Paul was serving these non-Christian Thessalonians, working night and day so that there'd be no burden upon any of the people there, and they lived their life in such a way that they gave them time, energy, resources as an act of their love. And I think there are thousands and thousands and thousands of ways that we can be serving non-Christians in our lives by giving to them. And I think it's absolutely fundamentally radical in our culture to do so. To give without an agenda. I mean, we live in a culture where giving is seen as a good thing, right? But to give up of time or energy or resources, whatever they be, without an agenda, without something sneaky, but just as an act of love to serve someone in your life, I think is so radical in our culture and is such a powerful way to serve non-Christians and spread and display the glory of God by loving non-Christians in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I found it fascinating and unsettling, actually, for most of my non-Christian friends. Like we so often try to serve and to love them, to give in certain ways, and inevitably, like, they feel this just need to pay it back. Absolutely. Right? They're like, okay, I gotta do something for you. Okay, well then what can I do for you? How can I make it? Like it's almost like unsettling that there's this generosity that really doesn't carry any strings with it. Like it doesn't have anything expected. And I think in that sense, like part of being a generous giver is also being a gracious receiver. I think, we don't reject that in that sense or try to, take that away from them. But at the same time, I think there's countless opportunities. If you're in a relationship with somebody, there's countless opportunities to meet needs. I mean, I think of even every like practical issue that comes up, whether it's like a plumbing problem in your apartment building, or it's, you know, like an issue with your fence between you and your neighbor. Like an issue with your fence between you and your neighbor is like, you can think like, oh man, this is like this is a big deal. Like I've got to try to, like, how do I figure out how to like make this fair? Like everyone, this is an opportunity to be generous, right? How can you bless them through taking care of more than your share, right? Of not trying to, you know, make sure that everything, you know, comes out exactly equal, but just being a blessing to them.
For those of you who don't know what a fence is, who live in Los Angeles, it's something that can divide two properties.
By fence I mean cinder block wall.
Yeah, your cinder block wall, the shared patio you have outside of your apartment.
That's right. I mean, you know, and whether it's, you know, watching kids or providing meals or sharing your car. I mean, and I think actually this begins. Sometimes I think people don't know where to start. I think this just begins with opening up your home. I think it just begins with inviting people in, like whether it's wherever you live, right? The house, apartment, like whatever context you have opportunities, and you have, if you have something to give, you have something to share. And whether it's inviting others in to share a meal, inviting others in just for the company, inviting somebody in just for, I think just you want to talk about like radical experiences, like hospitality is the gift of hospitality, and giving others the gift of hospitality and hosting them and inviting them into your home is just a radical, it's a radical concept in our culture. And by hospitality too, I don't mean like, I mean that different than entertaining. I don't mean like cleaning up your place like perfectly and like, you know, setting out like decorating everything exactly so that you can like now invite somebody in, not be embarrassed. I mean like bringing them into like your home, like just as it is, because a part of why they don't invite anybody into their home is because they're embarrassed that like it is lived in.
Yeah,
but we don't have to be. Right?
And
we don't have to be, and we can share in so many radical ways through that.
And I think that's such a helpful example, because the Bible commands hospitality. Be hospitable to one another. There's a command in the Bible towards hospitality that is related to giving. It's giving of your space, and it's a vulnerability. There's something so powerful about that. And one of the reasons, and I think your description is really helpful, Scott, because it gives kind of a sense of the breadth. We think of giving, we automatically think of money. We automatically think of giving money to a neighbor, which, sure, that there might be situations where that might be true, where actually giving of finances to people as they're struggling in different ways might absolutely be what God is calling you to. But it's not just that. I said time, energy, resources before. Sometimes what you give is an ear, where a neighbor who likes to talk but doesn't have anyone to talk to wants to talk to you. And maybe they talk for a long time, and you're kind of thinking, oh, I got things to do. I got to make dinner. I got to do whatever. I got to have homework, or I have whatever you have to do. Giving them that time is such a powerful way to serve and love them. And I've seen that. I think that is absolutely true with non-Christians in our lives. There's a lot of lonely people in our city, a lot of people who don't have people to talk to, people who've never been invited into someone's home. I was talking to a non-Christian neighbor of mine a few months ago, and they were describing how they'd lived in Los Angeles for like 15 years, never once been invited into somebody's home. That's not unusual in our city. Yeah. And that's such a powerful way to give time, energy, resources as a manifestation of that love and serving of our non-Christians in our lives.
So what about bearing with? Maybe your talkative neighbor example might be a good transition point to how does this work in this context of mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is such a great example, because I think it's easy to like give and then run off, right? Or like, and this is why people love giving out their car window. Right, like see somebody like here. You know, you can take this, and because I'm at a red light, and you know, you take this, and then I'm gone. Which, you know, I'm not saying this is fundamentally bad, but I think God's calling us to something deeper and broader than that. It's calling us into relationships with the non-Christians in our lives that where we are with them long enough to be annoyed by them, really, and not because
Which might not take long.
No. I mean, and long enough for them to be annoyed by us, right? I mean, there's
which also might not take long.
That's also true. But I think oftentimes people aren't used to relationships that will stick around through that. You know, maybe they know their family well because they kind of feel like they have to. but other relationships with even neighbors that will stick through the point of quirks or being annoying or even like worldviews rubbing up against each other, but even political differences or opinion differences, even about the nature of the neighborhood or what should be happening to the apartment building, right? Like even all these differences of opinions and things like that are things that I think in order to love them well, God is calling us to bear with them through these things. It reminds me of Jesus teaching in Luke 6, where he's telling his disciples, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? I think that's such a radical thought. Mm-hmm. I think actually that's probably, if you're listening to this, I imagine that's probably a hard concept for you. That like, okay, wait, I'll lend to people and not charge interest. I mean, that's generous. But he's saying, no, if you lend and you actually expect to get something back, he's like, that's just what everybody does. He's like, there's lots of non-Christians out there that will do that for a neighbor or for a family member. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. I mean, thank God that he's kind to the ungrateful and the evil, right? He's been so kind to us. He says, be merciful even as your Father is merciful. And I think that is a high and radical bar. I think that in a lot of ways, even more so than our relationship with Christians, in our relationship with non-Christians, we can really tend to simply form relationships with people like us, with people that share our interests, with people that share our opinions. And moving beyond that might make sense in the church, but outside of the church, it just seems like too high of an ask. But I think really this is what God is calling us to bear with people through those things so that we can show them love and maybe show them the type of love that is abnormal, that isn't the same type of love that they have with all their other friends who like the same things they like or think the same way they think or share the views that they share. But when we push through those things, bear with people. And I mean, this has been actually I feel like personally one of the strongest lessons I've learned even over the last 10 years, is because some of our closest non-Christian friends are people that I originally, or maybe initially, was like, well, we're not going to be friends, right? We're not going to be friends, but I'll try to love you because I kind of know I should. But as you push through that, you get to know people for people, mm-hmm. because they're image bearers. You have differences. Yeah, you have differences in the way you handle things or even the way you relate to one another. But as you see people as the image bearers that they are, it gives you really the eyes of love and builds deep, lasting relationships where we can not only manifest in powerful ways the gospel, but provide avenues to where our sharing of the gospel is so deeply genuine that it simply makes sense. Whether they accept it or not, it simply makes sense to those we're sharing it with.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of ways that this looks. And I think on a practical side, we used to live in an apartment complex where there was a front lawn, and there was a neighbor who their dog would just poop on the front lawn all the time, and they would just leave it. That's kind of annoying. And for the longest time, I would just walk by and I would look at the dog poop on the lawn, and I would just think of how selfish that person was. Oh, they're so selfish. I can't believe it. All of these things. And I just kind of thinking about how much better I am than them and how terrible they are as a neighbor and all these different things. And then I was really convicted by my selfishness and my lack of love for them and my lack of bearing with them. And I'm like, well, why don't I just pick it up and throw it away? It's not that complicated. It's not that hard. No. It just in my head, something radical had to turn to say, no. Look, I'm living in a community with people who are broken and for some of you, maybe you have a similar situation where that just drives you up the wall, and you just cannot handle, cannot understand. Instead of like gossiping about them, talking bad about them behind their back, tearing them down in my own mind, I was just like, well, that's just something they do, and I'll just serve by picking it up and throwing it away. So every week I'd be picking up dog poop that wasn't mine. I don't own a dog, and throw it away. And you know what? My heart towards them grew, and I loved them more as time went on. I cared for them more genuinely as time went on. Bearing with them, I think of another instance. I have a neighbor who, always wants to talk a lot about. Or I had a neighbor who always wanted to talk a lot about food, and he had this obsession with food culture, and he had this whole like approach about food and organic food, and I think that might be a common thing amongst people in our part of the city. But at first, it's not really my thing. If it's your thing and you're listening, all right, that's cool. But it wasn't really my thing, and my immediate response was similar. Like, I'm not going to talk to this guy. I don't want to talk to this guy about this. But then after thinking about it, how do I love and serve him? I asked him for, you have some books on some of your approaches, your thoughts on food and food culture. Let me learn. How can I engage you? How can I listen to you talk about why it matters so much and ask questions that are insightful instead of just dismissing you out of hand like I would probably naturally want to do. And there's something about kind of that bearing with, that patience that doesn't just immediately dismiss. What I would say when you were talking, Scott, I was thinking of the idea of chemistry. We think I only want to have friends who I click with and I have chemistry with. And that's not what God calls us to. God calls us to something radically different when he calls us to bear with one another.
All right, two more. So let's talk about forgiving. In the context of mission and relationships with non-believers, how does forgiveness manifest itself?
Well, forgiveness always is going to be a part of our relationships if we're going to have deep relationships, because sin will always be a part of our relationships. Whoever you're in a relationship with, they're going to experience your sin, and you're going to experience their sin. There's a better way to say that. I didn't say that properly. You both sin against each other, and you're going to experience each other's sin. And this is not any less true in a non-Christian context. But loving them means forgiving them and being willing to forgive them. Luke 6, again, kind of continuing that same thought from the Luke 6 passage that Scott read. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. And there's no qualification that says only forgive brothers and sisters in Christ. This is a call to forgive and offer forgiveness to anyone in your life. And there's something powerful, absolutely radical and powerful about forgiving non-Christians in your life when they sin against you, or asking for forgiveness from non-Christians when you sin against them. Most of the time in our world, when there's conflict, when there's sin, whether it's called sin or not, that just leads to a broken relationship and you just don't talk to each other. But the idea of reconciliation, the idea of, hey, I love you and I know this thing came between us, but I want to move past that. I want to forgive you. I want to be reconciled, is something very radical and a powerful way to serve non-Christians in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so true. I think as we try to make that practical in real ways, I think forgiveness essentially begins with modeling and teaching forgiveness. And that doesn't mean like teaching a class on forgiveness, but I think we should assume they don't understand it. And they don't understand what it is. And that most of the time will probably begin with us asking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a very, it's almost, I mean, in my experience, it's almost like uncomfortable, right? When you ask somebody for forgiveness, they're like, oh, no, you don't need anything from me. Like, it's cool. We're cool. Right? They just want you to say like, I'm sorry. But I think modeling, like, no, I do need something from you, and like I need your forgiveness because of how I sinned against you. And I think this also opens the door and it gives us the mechanism by which we can be reconciled when they've done something that genuinely hurts us. Right? When they've done something that has offended us. And I don't mean like they just were, not thoughtful or, spoke unkindly or whatever. But I mean, if we're in relationships with people that don't know Jesus, like chances are they're going to do something that really does hurt you. And I think the tenor of grace in a relationship that provides a foundation upon which you can go to them and tell them that, and tell them, this really hurt me. This really offended me. But I want you to know that I forgive you and I still love you. And like, that doesn't have to break our relationship. And I think in that, number one, it provides the means by which our relationship can continue, and we can continue to love them. And so we don't just drift off into different directions. And number two, it obviously models for them just the radical nature of God's love. I think one of the biggest hurdles, I think, for at least a lot of the non-Christians I know, is that they don't, that the gospel is hard because they don't think they need forgiveness. Right. Like they don't think they need forgiveness from God. Sin is just such a foreign concept, and you assume they're good enough. But even in small ways, by helping them see that we need forgiveness, and that means they need forgiveness too, but that's okay, because we're forgiving and because we have a God who ultimately is more forgiving than any of us are.
I think it's a really powerful point. It very likely means in your relationship with non-Christians being the first person to ask for forgiveness, rather than confronting them with their sin and telling them they need to seek forgiveness, because that's a category that is so foreign to so many of the people in our lives. But building a relationship on grace, I love that idea. And the idea of seeking reconciliation as a foundation for the relationship, and communicating a desire to continue to be in fellowship with one another, I think is a powerful way to manifest forgiveness. And even explaining it. You know what? In the context, and not everyone has kids, but I think kids, sometimes this is a powerful context, because sometimes neighbors' kids, I've experienced, where one of my kids does something wrong to the other kid, and my teaching to them is that they need to seek forgiveness from the other child. And oftentimes parents are like, no, that's okay. It's no big deal. Just say no big deal. And I'm like, no. It's an opportunity actually to explain why forgiveness is such a powerful thing when it comes to reconciliation. So there's situations like that, whether it's my own sin or the sin of my children or something like that, where there's plenty of opportunities for this kind of manifestation and this kind of serving of non-Christians in our lives.
It's so interesting, because I think so often that's exactly the response, right? No, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. But that doesn't give you the tools for when it is a big deal. Right. And or recognizing the times that it so often is a big deal and we don't treat it like that.
Okay, finally, pursuing. Now, this is something we spent a bit more time on in the mission section. Matt, can you walk us through these different elements of pursuit?
Yeah, pursuing is such a powerful way of serving non-Christians in our lives, because a lot of people are very passive about relationships. A lot of the time, people just wait for relationships to happen. But you love someone when you're intentionally deepening and seeking to deepen your relationship with them. And a lot of the people in our world are lonely. They don't necessarily have people in their lives that they're connected to, but they also don't necessarily have people who seek them out. This is another thing that's very foreign. And this whole category is things that are foreign to non-Christians in our lives in a lot of ways. Christians can demonstrate this powerful love for non-Christians in our lives by pursuing them, intentionally pursuing them, and seeking to have deeper relationships, not in a weird or aggressive way, but in a loving and a genuine way. John 20:21, Jesus tells his disciples, "As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." There's a sense of we're modeling our posture towards non-Christians in our lives with the posture that Jesus had as he came to earth. He came to seek and save the lost. He came to pursue. He left heaven to come to earth, and we can do the same in a metaphorical way by leaving the comfort of our own home or leaving the comfort of not reaching out to someone, and then breaking that kind of that wall that invisible wall that often divides us, and saying, no, I want to pursue a relationship with you. I don't want to be passive. I want to be active. I want to build this relationship with you. This is a powerful manifestation of serving non-Christians in our lives, because it's so similar to all the other ones. It's so radical to say, hey, I'm not going to just wait for this to happen. I really want to get to know you. And we sometimes have this thing where, we send a text message or we send an email or we make a phone call and some person doesn't get back to us, and we say, oh, well, I guess they don't want to hang out with me. But oftentimes people are just busy. They just forgot. Nothing personal. And then they wait 4 days and they're like, oh man, now I can't text them back. I feel awkward now, right? And so they're in this weird dance, overthinking things, and we do the same thing. Don't overthink it. Send another text message. Shoot another email. Make another phone call. Until they, don't be annoying. I'm not saying call every day or constantly, but be intentional.
Until they block your number.
Until they block your number. No, I guess for some of you out there, you might be too aggressive on this, and you know who you are. No, you probably don't. That's the problem. We'll talk to you personally.
Ask the people in your community group.
Yeah. Am I too aggressive in my relationships? If they say yes,
they'll be honest with you.
Yeah. But for the vast majority of us, we're in this kind of dance where we're kind of like waiting for someone else to make the first move. Don't. Just your neighbor says, oh, hey, we should hang out sometime. And then every time you see them for the next 6 months, once every 3 weeks, they say, oh, yeah, we should hang out sometime. Be the one that makes it happen. Go out of your way. Step out of your comfort zone. Knock on their door. Give them a phone call. Say, hey, can I have your number so I can text you or give you a phone call, and we can hang out. Anyways, it's a powerful manifestation of serving non-Christians in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely is. And I feel like I've gotten caught for even long swaths of time in certain just kind of acquaintance relationships, just kind of assuming like, oh, everybody's busy. Like, it's just, it's probably too hard. Like, I don't know how it's going to work out. Like, I don't know if you really want. But one of the things that I've found, even just as I've sought to, over the years, be increasingly intentional, like, my invitations almost never get turned down. Mm-hmm. They're almost always the type of thing that people, like, just deeply appreciate and that communicates real care and love and that they really enjoy, right? They're like, oh, okay, so it's not just work or dinner with work friends or, or coworkers or, the monotony of kind of normal, but like something different. We're going to like hang out, even just the opportunity to have real conversations. And again, if you're having real conversations with people that are willing to forgive you and bear with you and give to you and pray for you and
without
speak
agenda,
truth to you, without an agenda, like the vast majority of the time, people really enjoy that, and I think it like give us just the courage and the boldness to step out, but just exactly like you were saying.
And I can think of a million practical examples. Like I described, being the one who makes the first phone call or first text message. I think about like inviting neighbors, coworkers, friends to like birthday parties. Not waiting for them to invite you to a birthday party before you invite them. Just be the one who says, "Hey, we've been coworkers for some months or maybe some years. You want to come? We're having a gathering at my house for my birthday. You want to come hang out?" And you're pursuing them by offering an invitation and you're also being hospitable at the same time, right? Yeah. Or any kind of thing like that. There's tons of things like that.
It always strikes me as like funny that like I think I thought in high school that like the weird social like norms and things you had to try to figure out how to navigate like would go away when everybody grew up.
Just magically.
Yeah, they're like everybody grow up and then they go away. But they don't. And you're like, what in the world, what do you do with that? Well, the thing is, for those who are secure in Christ, like we are, for those that don't need to get our confidence or our security from what other people think of us, from weird social standings, from because of Christ, we're freed to not have to be subject to all of that. And we're freed to put ourselves out there. We're freed to even risk rejection with our non-Christian friends or with the non-Christians in our lives because it's not our ultimate rejection, right? Like we're accepted by Christ, and I think that provides us a sweet confidence to be appropriately bold.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know, maybe the way is it like gently bold, right? Kindly bold. Well, I guess it all comes back to, if you look at the paradigm, right? It all comes back to love, like being lovingly bold to pursue those around us.
And one of the ways we talk about this at different points, we talk about rhythms of life. And pursuing people in the context of the rhythms of your daily life is one of the most powerful ways. And so I already kind of tipped my hat a little bit to it, but the three that we really bring out the most often are eating, celebrating, and resting. If you're eating a meal, pursuing somebody by inviting someone to eat a meal with you, your family's eating a meal, whatever it is, celebrating birthday parties, Thanksgiving, holidays, whatever it is, Christmas, we've invited non-Christian neighbors into our Advent celebrations within our house. And actually one of our Jewish non-Christian neighbors, one of our Jewish non-Christian neighbors, because there are Jewish Christian people as well. Okay. So just clarifying why I said that. One of our Jewish non-Christian neighbors wanted to do a Hanukkah celebration with us and our family as well. So we're like, yeah, let's do it. We'll do Advent and we'll do Hanukkah, right? So inviting each other into like the celebrating and then resting as well. Like what kind of, you go camping, pursue someone, invite them along with you. You're watching a football game, whatever it is. Those daily rhythms of life can be powerful ways to pursue people and invite them in. And I want to clarify something as well here, because I see the look on Brian's face, and I know that our personalities are not exactly the same, and you guys can't see the look on Brian's face, but he's looking overwhelmed, okay, at the idea of inviting all these people into his home and all
down his
yeah,
brow.
he's really sweaty in the middle of April, whenever you're listening to this, whatever it is. The point is that I have a unique personality, right, where I feel like I want to do this with everybody. But you made a list at the beginning of this category of people in your life that you should be pursuing. It's not 1 million people. It's not 100 people. It's not 50 people. You made a short list of people, non-Christians in your life that you should be pursuing. Start there. Don't try to overwhelm yourself by asking every neighbor over to your house. And don't try to be something that you're not in some way. Start with the non-Christians on your list. Pursue them. Invite them to eat with you. Invite them to celebrate with you. Invite them to rest with you, and see how that goes as an act of serving and loving them. Brian loves people.
As I mop sweat off my brow over here, I think it's helpful to note that you called them rhythms, Matt, and I think the idea is that we are inviting people into the rhythms of our daily life. And most of the time when this stuff gets overwhelming, it's because you think you're rearranging like your normal life. You're sort of changing who you are and what you do in that entertaining kind of concept. So I'm going to clean up and make my life look different than it is and make myself different than I am and then invite somebody over. No, this is where that loving boldness or confidence of saying, no, I'm inviting these people into my actual life, into my actual self. That kind of pursuit is it's more overwhelming in one sense, but you get that salve of the gospel to calm that overwhelming. And it's less overwhelming in another sense because you're not having to change and rearrange and do everything differently in order to invite people in. So it's the normal birthday celebration you're inviting them to, not the special one designed, for special new people. It's the normal meals you're inviting them to, not the special one designed for, special new people.
And so it's not additional things.
Yeah.
It's just inviting them into what is already happening.
It's what Jesus did with his disciples. It's what people have done with us as Christians when we were non-Christians or as Christians now. It's what we do to one another, is just invite people into the lives we're actually living. And that becomes a unique challenge, but also a lot less overwhelming, and something that I think for everyone listening to this is eminently doable and something you could do like maybe even today.
And so that brings us to the end of that section, and we've seen this idea of serving non-Christians in our lives by praying for them, by giving to them, bearing with them, forgiving them, and pursuing them. And I think it's a powerful picture of love in the Christian life for non-Christians in our lives.
It's all part of walking on mission. It's seeking to love others by serving them in this particular session. And so we talked about why serving is an important part of loving others. Matt went through the 5 ways the Bible teaches us to serve people just a moment ago. And here are some practical questions for you leaving this session. So first, what aspect of serving comes easiest for you? And then which one is the most challenging? And second, how can you practically start to serve the non-Christians on your list in your life? And we'll talk to you next time.